The myth of universal panic, and why, well, the historical record tells a very different story. Here's the opening question that, overturns one of the most common assumptions about human behaviour when it's under attack. For decades, popular culture has repeated the same image whenever the subject of the 1940-41 bombings of Britain comes up. The assumption is that cities under aerial bombardment must have descended into uncontrollable panic. Sirens blaring, bombs falling, civilians running wildly through the streets, crowds collapsing into mass hysteria. It's a powerful image, but it's also largely incorrect. When historians began carefully examining wartime diaries, civil defence reports, hospital logs and police records after the war, they discovered something that honestly contradicted the entire theory of mass psychological collapse. Instead of universal panic, the overwhelming pattern was discipline, routine and, something much more surprising, calm functionality. Yes, fear existed. Anyone who says otherwise has never heard a bomb whistle through the night sky. But fear rarely translates into chaos. In fact, many observers reported the opposite. Under sustained bombing campaigns, civilians often settled into a strange rhythm of practical survival. They organised shelters, continued commuting to work, and developed routines that allowed daily life to continue even while explosions shook the ground. Psychologists studying the period called this phenomenon the Blitz spirit. While that phrase has been, romanticised over time, the underlying observation remains valid. Human beings are capable of remarkable psychological adaptation when danger becomes constant. Understanding why this happened is more than just an academic exercise. In many ways, people living in 2026 face a different but equally destabilizing environment. Instead of falling bombs, the modern world delivers relentless digital stimulation, breaking news alerts, algorithmic outrage, endless crisis headlines and social media amplification that makes every problem feel immediate and, catastrophic. The result is a paradox. Many modern individuals experience higher daily anxiety levels while sitting safely at home than civilians did while living through air raids. That difference has less to do with courage and more to do with how the human brain processes threat. The civilians of the 1940s developed practical mental frameworks that allowed them to function under pressure. They didn't necessarily study psychology textbooks, but through experience they discovered techniques that modern neuroscience now recognizes as powerful emotional regulation tools. This guide examines those forgotten mental strategies. It explores how civil defense workers regulated their breathing to maintain control during chaos. It explains how ordinary citizens learn to compartmentalize overwhelming threats into manageable tasks. It explores the quiet philosophy that allowed many people to stop obsessing about uncontrollable dangers and instead focus on what they could still influence. Most importantly, it shows how these 80-year-old techniques can be adapted to the psychological battlefield of the modern era. Because, honestly, the greatest advantage a person can develop in an unstable world is not stronger walls or larger supplies. It is an unbreakable mind. The myth of mass hysteria during the Blitz collapses when archival data is examined closely. When the bombing campaigns over Britain began in 1940, many government planners expected widespread panic. Early psychological theories suggested that civilians exposed to sustained aerial attack would quickly collapse into disorder. Some officials predicted large-scale riots, breakdown of social order, and a population incapable of maintaining basic economic activity. These fears influence policy. Emergency plans included provisions for mass evacuations and even contingency measures for restoring order if public morale collapsed. Authorities worried that the psychological shock of modern aerial warfare would prove too much for urban populations. But when the bombs actually began falling, something unexpected happened. Reports from police departments, hospital administrators, and civil defense coordinators repeatedly noted the same pattern. Most civilians followed instructions calmly. Air raid shelters filled quickly but rarely descended into chaos. Transportation systems resumed operation each morning. Factories returned to production even after nights of heavy bombardment. Archival data supports these observations. Studies of hospital admissions during major bombing periods show that psychological breakdown cases remained relatively low compared to physical injuries. The number of civilians requiring treatment for severe panic reactions was far smaller than planners had anticipated. Diaries from ordinary citizens reinforce the pattern. Many entries describe fear, exhaustion, and frustration, but also determination and routine. People complained about sleepless nights and damaged homes. Yet they also wrote about work schedules, neighborhood cooperation, and efforts to maintain normal family life. This did not mean the population was fearless. Rather, people adapted. Once individuals realized that bombing was not a one-time event, but a continuing reality, their mental response shifted from shock to management. Humans are remarkably good at building routines around persistent threats. The myth of universal panic survived largely because dramatic stories spread more easily than quiet resilience. A single incident of hysteria captured attention, while thousands of calm responses passed unnoticed. The historical record tells a more nuanced story. In moments when observers expected collapse, they instead witnessed an extraordinary capacity for psychological adjustment. Modern digital overstimulation creates anxiety patterns that wartime civilians rarely experienced. The difference between the psychological environment of the 1940s and that of today becomes clear when examining how information flows through society. During wartime bombings, danger was real and immediate. Sirens sounded, aircraft engines could be heard overhead. Explosions shook buildings, but the threat had clear boundaries. Air raids followed recognizable patterns. There were warning sirens, attack periods, and eventually an all-clear signal. After all was clear, people emerged from shelters and resumed their routines. Modern digital life lacks those boundaries. Instead of distinct episodes of danger, individuals are exposed to a continuous stream of alarming information. News cycles refresh every minute. Social media platforms amplify worst-case scenarios. Algorithms prioritize emotionally intense content because it keeps users engaged. The brain interprets this constant stimulation as a never-ending environment. Psychologists sometimes call this the perpetual alarm state. The nervous system remains partially activated because there is never a clear signal that the danger has ended. Ironically, people living through physical bombardment often experience more defined periods of calm than individuals scrolling through modern news feeds. Wartime civilians learned to conserve mental energy between attacks. Once the all-clear siren sounded, many consciously returned to daily life. They repaired damage, prepared meals, and focused on practical tasks. Modern individuals often do the opposite. Even during perfectly safe moments, they consume streams of crisis information that trigger stress responses. Understanding this contrast helps explain why historical accounts of wartime calm are not evidence of emotional numbness. Instead, they demonstrate effective psychological boundary settings. The calm threshold explains when fear transforms into functional survival. One of the most interesting patterns observed in wartime diaries involves what psychologists now describe as a threshold effect. When danger first appears, the human brain often reacts with heightened fear. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, and attention narrows toward the threat. This is the classic fight or flight response. But when the threat becomes continuous, something else happens. After repeated exposure, the brain often shifts into a different mode of operation. Instead of cycling through intense fear responses, it begins regulating itself for sustained functionality. The goal changes from escaping the danger to managing life within it. This transition point can be called the calm threshold. Below the threshold, individuals experience acute panic. Above it, they develop routines and coping mechanisms that allow them to operate effectively despite ongoing risk. The threshold varies between individuals, but once crossed, behavior becomes noticeably different. People begin planning again. They solve practical problems. They return to work. Historical accounts from civil defense personnel reveal that many volunteers crossed this threshold within weeks of the first major bombings. The constant threat forced them to adapt quickly. Modern stress environments rarely produce the same transition because threats remain abstract and ambiguous. Without clear exposure followed by resolution, the brain never settles into stable adaptation. Learning how people cross that calm threshold during wartime offers valuable insights for navigating modern psychological pressure. The breathing discipline of air raid wardens maintained clarity during chaos. Air raid wardens played a crucial role during bombing campaigns. Their responsibilities included directing civilians to shelters, coordinating rescue efforts, and communicating instructions in extremely noisy environments. Maintaining clear speech under those conditions requires physical control. Many wardens developed rhythmic breathing patterns that allowed them to project their voices even while adrenaline surged through their bodies. The technique was simple but effective. They inhaled slowly through the nose for several seconds, allowing the diaphragm rather than the chest to expand. Then they released the breath steadily while speaking. This pattern stabilized vocal tone and prevented the breathless shouting that often accompanies panic. The rhythm served another purpose as well. Controlled breathing sends signals to the nervous system that reduce the intensity of the fight-or-flight response. Heart rate decreases, muscles relax slightly, cognitive processing becomes clearer. Modern individuals can apply the same principle during stressful situations. A practical method involves inhaling through the nose for 4 seconds, holding briefly, and then exhaling slowly for 6 seconds. Repeating this cycle several times stabilizes breathing and improves mental focus. Civil defense workers did not learn this from psychology manuals. They discovered it through necessity. But the effect remains the same. Breathing rhythm controls emotional intensity. Sensory anchoring allows the mind to ignore chaotic external noise. Bombing environments are loud, unpredictable, and, well, just completely overwhelming. Explosions create shockwaves, buildings collapse, and alarms echo through city streets. Yet, many civil defence workers managed to focus on specific tasks despite the chaos. One strategy involved something called sensory anchoring. Instead of trying to block out all the noise, individuals would concentrate their attention on a single stable sensory input. This could be the feeling of their feet on the ground, the grip of a flashlight handle, or even the steady rhythm of their own breathing. By directing attention toward a controllable sensation, the brain actually reduced its focus on unpredictable external stimuli. This technique works because, attention functions a bit like a spotlight. The mind simply cannot fully process every sensory input at the same time. When attention locks onto a stable anchor, those disruptive signals really do lose their intensity. Modern professionals use similar methods in high-stress fields such as aviation and emergency medicine. A simple version can be practiced during stressful moments. Just focus your attention on one physical sensation for several seconds. Notice the feeling of the chair beneath you or the temperature of the air entering your lungs. This brief shift can interrupt escalating anxiety and restore concentration. For wartime volunteers operating under bombardment, such techniques were not just philosophical exercises. They were practical survival tools. The internal bunker of compartmentalization protects productivity during disasters. One of the most powerful mental strategies developed during the bombing campaigns involved compartmentalization. Individuals learned to separate the overwhelming scale of the war from the immediate tasks in front of them. A factory worker repairing machinery did not dwell on the entire strategic situation of the conflict. An air raid warden assisting injured civilians did not analyze the long-term trajectory of the war during rescue operations. Instead, they focused on the present task. This mental structure can be described as an internal bunker. Just as physical shelters protected civilians from falling bombs, psychological compartments protected the mind from being crushed by the enormity of the situation. Inside the bunker existed only the immediate problem to solve. Outside remained the vast uncertainty of the war. Maintaining that separation allowed individuals to continue functioning. Modern stress environments often lack this compartmentalization. People absorb information about global crises while, simultaneously trying to perform everyday tasks. The brain attempts to process everything at once. Rebuilding an internal bunker means intentionally limiting the scope of attention during work periods. When focusing on a project, treat that project as the entire operational environment. Broader concerns can be addressed later, but they do not belong inside the task compartment. The one-room focus technique keeps the mind operational while the world feels unstable. A variation of compartmentalization used by many wartime workers can be called the one-room focus technique. The idea is simple. Imagine that the entire world temporarily shrinks to the size of a single room. Inside that room exist only the tools, people and tasks necessary for the current objective. Everything outside the room becomes irrelevant until the task is complete. This mental model mirrors how emergency responders operate during crises. Firefighters entering a burning building concentrate exclusively on the rescue path in front of them. They do not mentally simulate every possible structural failure that might occur later. Wartime factory workers adopted similar focus patterns. Production lines had to continue operating despite the knowledge that bombing could resume at any moment. Applying this technique today involves consciously narrowing attention. When writing a report, the world becomes the desk, the keyboard, and the document. When repairing equipment, the world becomes the workbench and the tools. The technique sounds simplistic, but its effectiveness lies in preventing cognitive overload. Human working memory can process only a limited number of variables at once. The one-room focus method protects that capacity. You know, Stoic fatalism removes the exhausting burden of constant worry. A surprising philosophical attitude, if you ask me, appears frequently in wartime diaries and letters. Many civilians, they adopted a form of Stoic fatalism often summed up by the phrase "qui sera, sera," meaning what will be, will be. At first glance, this attitude might look a bit defeatist, doesn't it? But actually, it functioned as a powerful psychological strategy. By accepting that certain external events were beyond their control, folks freed themselves from endless speculation about worst-case scenarios. Instead of asking whether bombs might fall tomorrow, they focused on what could be done today. This mental shift, I'd say, reduced decision fatigue. Constantly evaluating uncontrollable threats just drains your cognitive resources. Accepting uncertainty, it allows those resources to be redirected toward actionable tasks. Stoic philosophers in ancient times described the same principle: divide the world into two categories, things within your control and things outside it. Energy belongs only in the first category. Wartime civilians, often without realizing it, applied this philosophy intuitively. They reinforced shelters, organized supplies, and supported neighbors. Meanwhile, they stopped obsessing about strategic bombing decisions made hundreds of miles away. The result, really, was greater mental stability. Accepting uncertainty creates room for personal agency. You know, modern culture often encourages the illusion that every risk can be predicted and controlled with enough information. But wartime environments shattered that illusion pretty quickly. Civilians understood that many outcomes depended on factors completely beyond their influence. Aircraft routes, military decisions, and the trajectory of individual bombs were not variables they could manipulate. Paradoxically, accepting that limitation actually increased their sense of agency. Once individuals stopped trying to manage the unmanageable, they discovered just how much remained within their control. They could reinforce their homes, assist neighbors, organize evacuation plans, and maintain community morale. The focus shifted from prediction to preparation. This distinction remains important today. People often spend hours analyzing potential threats through endless news consumption. Yet, many of those threats remain outside personal influence. Redirecting attention toward preparation rather than prediction restores a sense of control. Relaxed readiness replaces the exhausting cycle of constant vigilance. Another pattern observed among experienced civil defense workers involved the development of relaxed readiness. At the beginning of bombing campaigns, many volunteers remained in a state of constant hyper-alertness. Every distant noise triggered an alarm. Sleep became difficult. Over time, seasoned workers learned that maintaining maximum vigilance indefinitely was unsustainable. Instead, they adopted a posture of relaxed readiness. Their awareness remained sharp when necessary, but they allowed themselves to rest fully during quiet periods. This preserved mental energy for moments when rapid response truly mattered. Modern high-performance professions use the same principle. Elite athletes alternate between intense focus and deliberate recovery. Emergency responders rotate shifts to avoid burning out. Continuous stress without recovery leads to diminished performance. Learning when to disengage temporarily is not a weakness, it is strategic preservation. The legacy of the unbreakable mind still offers guidance in 2026. 80 years after the bombing campaigns of the Second World War, the psychological strategies developed by civilians and civil defense workers remain surprisingly relevant. The threats have changed, but the human nervous system remains the same. People still face environments that trigger fear, uncertainty, and cognitive overload. The difference today lies in the form those pressures take. Instead of sirens and explosions, modern stress often arrives through constant information exposure. Adapting the lessons of wartime resilience requires translating those techniques into contemporary routines. Breathing control becomes a tool for regulating emotional reactions to digital stress. Compartmentalization becomes a method for protecting focus in a world filled with distractions. Stoic acceptance becomes a way to filter the endless stream of uncontrollable global events. These strategies were not theoretical inventions. They emerged from real human experience under some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. Creating a daily mental blackout protects attention in the information age. One of the most practical ways to apply wartime resilience strategies involves establishing a daily mental blackout period. During the blackout, all external information streams temporarily shut down. No news updates, no social media scrolling, no endless crisis analysis. Instead, attention shifts toward physical tasks, creative work, or quiet reflection. The purpose is not ignorance, but recovery. Just as wartime blackout curtains protected cities from enemy aircraft by reducing visible light, a mental blackout protects the mind from excessive stimulation. Even 30 minutes of intentional information silence can reset cognitive balance. During that period, the nervous system moves away from constant alert mode and returns to baseline calm. Regular practice strengthens the ability to maintain focus and emotional stability. Reclaiming these forgotten mental tactics may be the ultimate advantage in unstable times. The civilians who endured sustained bombing campaigns did not view themselves as psychological pioneers. They were ordinary people forced into extraordinary circumstances. Yet the habits they developed reveal something important about human resilience. Calm can be trained. Focus can be protected. Fear can be managed rather than eliminated. In an era defined by constant information pressure, rediscovering these older mental frameworks may provide one of the most valuable competitive advantages available. A person who can regulate their breathing during stress, compartmentalize overwhelming problems, and maintain calm focus while others panic holds a powerful edge. That edge does not require advanced technology. It requires discipline and perspective. History offers the blueprint. The challenge is choosing to apply for it. If you enjoy exploring the overlooked psychological lessons hidden inside real historical events, make sure to subscribe and share this channel with another history enthusiast. The past still holds many strategies that can help us navigate the future, and uncovering them together is one of the most rewarding journeys a curious mind can take.